Hey, this is Troels. Let's bring out the composer snacks and grab your favorite beverage because we're about to go into a journey with our new intimate studio strings. But let's start listening here so I can get a sip of my favorite Coke in the world, by the way, the Violin. So where does the journey begin when you have over 110,000 new samples? In the past, we did Adagio and Adagio Tuo, which was also called Agitato, then put them all together in a compilation called Anthology. We then moved on and did Majestica, which is a 100-piece string section. Then we did our new Century strings, and all of them are sort of dedicated to orchestral string writing in the traditional sense. You have your whole, you have all those things, and all the articulations are played that way. But what about pop music? What about rock? What about disco? What about that sort of intimate, more Max Richter-like, really close, personal, passionate style where you can hear the individual players and you're not baptizing the sound in a beautiful orchestral hall. You rather just have a dry studio and really hear the presence and near field of the people. That's what intimate studio strings is about. And if you look at the UI here, you can notice that you can actually control how many strings you want per section. So just looking at the violins alone here, you can choose it between 1, different variations of 2 violins, different variations of 3 violins, 4 or 5 violins. And one of the things you're going to be learning, and it's really been useful for me actually working with this library, is that it's all about colors. You always hear about instrument colors and how you can use instruments and create these different colors. This library is the perfect way of experimenting with that. Do you want your close quartet of just a single player, or do you want more players to get more of that full volume kind of sound? Like, it's up to you. And as we're going to go through this video, I'll try to play around with different things and show you the different colors you can create very, very easily by using the UI here. For example, if I was to load violas and cellos and basses, it's as quick as you're seeing it right now, and I can choose 2 basses or 3 cellos or whatever that notion is. You can do it that easily and just unload and load super quickly. And the same thing with our massive articulation system. We're going to get into that as well. But let me just start by playing the piece we just heard and try to isolate a couple of different aspects from it. Here in the beginning, let me just try to play the individual short notes here. And as you may be noticing, I'm actually alternating between staccato and spiccato. And even though we have them at many velocities and round robin and all that nonsense, we can actually have fun combining them. I like to do it to create a little more variance, particularly because we're in a studio, everything is super, super tight. So it's nice to create a little more natural variation. So that's why you're seeing me alternate between the staccatos and spiccatos in this little part here. I also added this ostinato pattern to it. We actually have a massive amount of ostinato patterns that are fully tempo synced. They're awesome because they create a little more life in the music. And when you add the short notes to them, you get a little more sort of full section playing. And just for the ostinato or measured tremelos, let me just show you what we got here. You have potato slow, medium, fast. You have measured tremolo, both fast and slow. And then we have a specific measured legato style as well, which I'm using in some of the other demos that we're also going to go through. It's just to show you the depth of these things. For example, if we play this one, and I'll do it later as well, you can choose any tempo you want. They're also dynamically recorded, so you have them in velocities too. It's super cool to combine different types of short notes together. If we add a little more here, one more ostinato and pizzicato, we're going to get even more life into the little ensemble here. The last proportion of the string writing in the demo is a solo violin playing a beautiful, very intimate type of legato. Let me just show you right here. You can see that I've actually loaded all the individual sections here, but right now I've just triggered a solo violin and it's only playing one, meaning there's only one player playing the solo. If I want to have 2 or 3, and I'll show you that as well, you can just do that by clicking on the numbers here and all of a sudden you change the ensemble. But it's a beautiful solo violin, and the way we've done legato in this library, following the same concepts that we have in Century, is that we have layered legato. So when you play soft on your keys, you trigger a portamento, a slower type of sort of slow transition on the strings, but the harder you play, the faster it can get. And for this demo, because it's a little more emotional, I sometimes like to use the portamento for some of the transitions. Generally speaking, when you compose for strings, the longer they have to slide on the strings, let's say an octave, that's sort of acceptable to use portamento in, but you don't want to do it for just a half note or a whole note. Let me try to play that on the keys. It's a little bit easier to demonstrate on the keys than talking about it. And that's legato in a nutshell. But let's say that you want to try to play legato with a few more strings than just a single player here. Just click a number here so we can try to listen. You know, when I wrote the demos for Intimate Studio Strings, it was a lot of fun because the library really can take you in different directions. So we just listened to a bunch of short notes, but let's try to dial it way down in tempo here. Listen to a solo bass and some arcs playing together and see where that takes us. Normally you want to hear like a solo violin or a solo cello playing, but we really have a beautiful bass in this library as well. And I think it's cool sometimes. This is one of the beautiful things about libraries, that you can try different combinations. In this case, it's pretty much just a solo bass surrounded by these beautiful string arcs. And if you notice carefully over here, you're going to see that we actually have a bunch of different arcs. Arcs are these very expressive phrases where the players weave in and out of dynamics. In this case, we actually have 4 different types of dynamic strokes for 1 bow, and we have another 4 for 2 bows. This is an enormous amount of content, but it really allows you to do super expressive string writing. Obviously, we have sustains and sustains with vibrato, and you can do this beautiful crossfade by using dynamics and expression, but sometimes you really just want to have real people playing what they do for a living, and it does make a difference. I tend to come back to the arcs for most of my writing. They just sound more real and just have more of that sort of human aspect to them. Check out what happens when you combine a solo bass with arcs. while that beautiful saxophone solo might take a little bit of the attention away, let's try to steer the attention back to the solo bass that was playing in the beginning. The saxophone is from an upcoming library and it's totally a legato patch. I'll show it to you a little later as well. But let's listen and talk a little more about the solo bass. So obviously you can easily play a solo instrument. You can just load whatever ensemble you want. Click number 1 here, meaning one player. And then all of a sudden you have a solo player doing that. In this case, if you notice up here, it says 2 on the tuning here. I actually tuned the bass a little bit up just because I want a little more tension and speed in the vibrato. It's important with sample libraries that you don't always just lock yourself completely down to what we do as developers. Sometimes tuning 1 or 2 tones and transposing your keyboard the same way can be a good thing to do. You can get a little more leverage out of them. Let me try to solo the solo bass and the arcs so you can hear how it all plays together. The arcs are really helping oozing that sort of natural emotion. If you think about most string writing, it's never really static unless you just have some kind of droney thing going on. For the most part, they weave in and out dynamics, and it's really, really important to do super realistic mock-ups that you pay attention to that, and as often as you can, use the real deal. Don't always sit and fiddle with the CCs and mod reels. You have to do it for legato, obviously, but for arcs, this is just there. And I'm actually slopping this one because I'm only playing one patch actually normally, and I'll show them a little later in this video as well, where I'm alternating between the arcs. That makes it even more realistic, but let's just listen to them. Another cool little trick is that you can actually use different kind of players. If you notice here, it says 1A, you can also click 1B, and all of a sudden you have a completely different bass player. If you want to play them both together, you can click number 2. And if you notice here for the different sections, for the violins, for example, you can see the same thing. You can have 1 player, you can have 2, you can have combinations of different 2 that sounds different, 3, and so forth. And it actually allows you to really design your own colors, and it's a lot of fun to hear the difference between just 1 and 2 players and how the mix and the color of your mix changes immediately. Oh yeah, and then of course we had the saxophone as well. I'm not going to show you the UI just yet because it's not quite done, but I will show you that it's actually a legato patch just playing here, and there's not a lot of stuff going on. It simply just works. And it's one of the things that we're learning more and more about when it comes to legato. Is really how to figure out how to make things sound super smooth and feel right on the keys, so you don't have to sit and overthink your composition as well. Let me just trigger the saxophone here together with the arcs in this last proportion of the demo. And there you go. Would have known that writing for solo bass and arcs and tenor saxophone would be a good combination, but that's one of the beautiful things about sample libraries, in my opinion, that you can try different colors, and if you ever go out and record live, you know what you're looking for in terms of the sound and individual players and feel and all that stuff. And I think with Intimate Studio Strings, it's actually not just a cool sample library, but it's also a really educational one. It helps you understand sound and color, and very, very easily, because you can sit and play your mix and just try out different players and combination of groups and then really find out what you like. Let me give you another example of what we can also take this library. Let's venture a little bit back to the 70s. I do wonder what the world would have looked and sounded like without disco. It seems like it's one of those things that just keeps coming back and giving more and more. This was probably more like new disco, but you get the idea. I remember when we were discussing the massive articulation set for Intimate Studio Strings, Cam was pushing really hard to get a full-on disco suite in the library. And if you look here on the effects section, you can notice that we have a staggering amount of disco and party-related string effects. We have drops, slow and fast. We have runs in fifths and in full octaves, both running slow and fast and both running up and down. And that, my friend, combined is a full-on disco suite. Let me just try to isolate the different components here, all the effects, so you can enjoy the disco effects in all their exposed glory. Let's just take a quick look here at the articulation system. So obviously we just looked at the effects. We also have harmonics in there. We have our performance category here, which is using measured tremeloes in different speeds and dynamics, and the same for portato. So repeated notes at all these different speeds. Obviously all this naturally adapts to your host tempo. We have both articulations. We have all the individual arcs in here, both for one type of stroke and two different types of strokes. We also have a sol ponticello, and even arcs for tremolo, sol, ponticello as well. On top of that, we have our traditional category. This is sort of what we've gotten used to over the years. Staccato, spiccato, pizzicato, marcato, sustains with vibrato, contadino, layered legato, tremolando or tremolo, and then both trill for whole notes and half notes. Let's try to step it up a little bit in tempo and try to figure out what the strings actually sound like when they are matched against a more sort of modern pop kind of composition. Earlier in this video, I was talking about how you can play around with different colors, and I want to show you an example of that. Let me just try to repeat a single part of this little mini demo, this upbeat little mini demo, and then try to play around with the different colors. I'm going to go into the instrument parts here and then play around with the volume, the microphone, the section size and all that stuff, just to show you how I approach colors. So I'll compose something first, and then I'll sit and use the different modularities in the same sense that you almost have a modular synth. I don't know, I'm doing patch-based stuff. And the notion is that you design your own sound and do it in real time. Just use your ear, see what sounds good. Let me just give it a couple of goes here. Let me also try to do the same thing for the prepared piano as we play through this thing one more time. It doesn't always have to be rocket science writing for strings and doing orchestration. If you look at the sequence here, it's super basic. There's two individual notes playing up and down here, and then just one patch playing some chords here using different types of arcs. I want to wrap the video up here just by really showing what you can do when you start combining different arcs. In this case here, I'm demoing the two bow arcs, meaning that you get a natural stroke on the middle of the arc when the group is playing. And it's just to show you how expressive you can actually write just exclusively with this library and using nothing else. I don't think I've ever come across something that has this level of intimacy and close heart, like really heartfelt sound to it. So let me just play the demo here and then let's talk a little more about it. look here carefully on the sequence, one part is playing up here. That's the legato for the solo violin. You can see I choose one player here. I'm using a little bit more of the distant microphone, and I haven't activated any of the other ones. The second proportion here, that would be this sequence here, is played by another legato line, which is a little deeper in its note. And I made that by combining both the bass and then two cellos together. And you can see the bass is actually using a lot more of the near field here, and then the cellos are a little further away. That's just the aesthetics that I wanted for this particular track. And then on top of that, I'm triggering these other beautiful arcs here. You can see I'm actually using the two bow strokes in multiple configurations and combining one violin with one viola with one cello. And you can see the specific settings here. And that's how simple it is. Let me just play it one more time here while I'm scrolling through the articulations here so you can see it. And that, hopefully in more than just one way, is intimate studio strings. It's 110,000 samples. It's completely modular ways of thinking about strings, and with the ability to combine any section you want with the microphones, everything you want to do, any articulation you can possibly think of, even venturing deeply into the realm of disco and alternative effects. All the arcs themselves are so amazing. It's one of the things and I can see my behavior even with Century and Adagio as well in Anthology. I keep coming back to them. They just work in a different way than you can do on your normal sort of sustained patches. So hopefully all this combined has given you a good idea about what Intimate Studio Strings is about. It's a personal release to us. We've been working on it for a little over 2 years. And it's just one of those things, maybe a tiny little sample milestone in its own way. It's doing some things that we haven't been able to do quite before. And to do an exposed piece like I just did is about the hardest things you can do with mock-ups. So I hope you guys can have fun with it. We really tried to push this one in a more affordable range so everyone can have fun with it. We just want to put it out there in the ether and see what you guys can do with it. So I hope you like it. This is Troels signing out from ATL. Take care.